If we're going to rise to the great challenge of abortion in the world today, we've got to multiply our leaders. And today I get to introduce you to one of the new emerging leaders from Latin America who's taking the gospel of life to pastors in a way that they can reteach it to their people, which is producing an army of good Samaritans. Join us. Thank you for joining us today. My co-person partner, Mark Nicholson, is not able to join us today. He's also traveling, and for several weeks now, we're both traveling, coming and going, but we're going to get back together soon. And I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to introduce to you a very good friend of mine and co-worker, Anderson Ocampo. Anderson, welcome to our program.
Hello, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, just so everybody knows, Anderson is his first name. I have never met anybody in the
Mm.
world who had Anderson as a first name, but Anderson is his first name. And you live in Medellin, Colombia.
That is correct. Medellin, Colombia. That's the city of the eternal, how is it called? I think no, it's not fall. Well, we have a great weather here.
Okay.
That's what matters.
Nice, cool, beautiful. I'll tell you though, everybody in America who's watching this, as soon as I mention Medellin, Colombia, they're going to be thinking of only one thing, and that is drug cartels and Pablo Escobar. So is Pablo
You're
still
right.
hanging around at your local coffee shop over there? I mean, what's going on there in Colombia? Is it dangerous to walk the streets or what?
Yeah, I think you're right. Everywhere I go, people think about that person. That's the first name that come to people's mind. And that's
Mm,
understandable for the movies, the Netflix series, the TV
yeah.
novels in Colombia. They have been exploring that history in Colombia. However, that was a history back in the 80s and the 90s. And the Medellin city has really made a great effort to change that history, to change that culture. And
Mm,
so physically, the structure of the city has changed. It is beautiful. We have amazing metro, amazing transportation system, amazing tunnels to get to the airport. We have two airports in our city.
mm,
We have many foreigners that love coming here. We have rivers where tourists can
mm,
go and enjoy. And so that to say that the culture has changed a lot in terms of drugs, and it's
mm.
not like you can go and buy illegal drugs in a drugstore. That is not true, though sometimes people think about that.
Yeah. Well, God has been merciful then to Colombia in general because it's a democratic elected country. It shifts from
Mm.
kind of leaning conservative to leaning liberal, like we ebb and flow here in the state. But I've been to Medellin numerous times, and you're right, it's a beautiful city with big, beautiful mountains all around it. Um, but we're not tourist people, okay? We're not here to talk about tourism. I just
Right.
wanted to acknowledge the fact that you are from a very famous part of the world for negative reasons, and it's no longer true. So
Yeah.
praise God for that. But uh, we've known each other for 7 or 8
Since
years. Is that
2018. Yeah. We met in 2018.
2018. Okay. And just tell us, quickly about, did you grow up in a Christian family? Have
Uh,
you been a believer since you were 2 years old? Tell us a little bit about how
yeah.
your passion for Christ has come about.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. That's a great question that is very well connected with what I'm doing here right now in Passion Life. I grew up in a Catholic home, as many. That's has been our tradition here in Colombia. And I grew up in a Catholic home. And then when I was about 12 years old, I'm going to share a story and then I will connect that how I came to Christ. When I was about 12 years old, my mom tells me that back in 85, became pregnant and she was not married. She had a crisis and a family member came to help and gave her pills. She took those pills and she was very scared and freaked out. And she went to the bathroom and she threw up those pills. And she started praying. And long story short, the pills didn't work. However, the pregnancy, those 9 months, became very, very difficult for her. So when I was supposed to be born in August the 29th, okay, and then she comes to the doctor, no pain, there's no labor pains and anything. So all the way through September 22nd, she has to be induced labor and finally gives birth with a 10-month-old newborn baby, almost dead. So they take the baby to the infants hospital. And back in the day, we didn't have the transportation we have now. So she has to go home and every day take two buses to nurse the baby. They didn't have many hopes about the baby. So the doctors quickly call a priest and baptize the baby and call it George. Um, and then my mom tells me that somebody from somewhere, a woman comes and prays for her. And then, well, here I am telling the story. They rebaptized me, named me Anderson. You probably remember that TV show, MacGyver. The actor's last name is Anderson. And I think that's why they named me Anderson. Um, so, she tells me this story, and I come to this kind of curiosity and interest why that happened, why I was born instead of not. And then when I am 15 years old, a neighbor shares with me the gospel. I was out in the street about 10 p.m. And he comes to me and he says, Anderson, I got to tell you about Jesus Christ. He has changed my life. You know me, I was in prison in the US, and now I am here sharing the gospel in my house. And then, I go home and literally after I wake up the next day, I feel like a total different person. That was 25 years ago. And so I spent my entire teenagers in the church, fasting. We're a very active Pentecostal church. And when I met you in 2018, I already started my research on the pro-life questions when does life begin and all the debates and everything. I was wondering why my church never talked about that, never talks about that in a sermon format or any other. And so, yeah, that to say how I came to Christ, and eventually how I connect that story with, in a way, God's purpose for my life to
Yeah,
understand.
sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You were born in effect. You were you are connected to a crisis pregnancy, and by the mercy of God, your mother had a, a holy fear, let's say,
Mhm.
and fought to save your life after getting some bad advice. And I'm sure now, seeing how your life has unfolded and you're helping others, it does have a ring of poetic beauty and justice to
Yeah.
it. How you started, so
Yeah. Yeah. And I share that story anytime I can. And it's a breakthrough. Helps me break the ice. And I think that's very typical. I'm pretty sure many pro-life leaders are very familiar with experience like that.
okay. So since 2025, about 3 years now, you've been working full time, basically with other pastors, addressing the
Mhm.
thing that you hinted at. That is that many pastors, they're just not even sure how to address the moral crisis of abortion. And so tell us about what it is that you're doing today with pastors, and
Mhm.
maybe tell us, a story or two that come to mind uh,
Mhm.
that is a encouraging story about how the pastor was able to really find his footing, find his voice, and begin to be a good leader on the moral crisis of abortion.
Yeah. Yeah, let me start with a story. About a year ago, I was in Mexico, and after teaching the four questions, come this pastor, and he says, Anderson, I have been a Christian since the 90s, and I've never heard this. And I actually took one of my ex-girlfriends to practice an abortion. And then 2 years later, I met her again because I got married with another woman. And then she says, um, I haven't been able to have children. And then now he's in Christ, and he says, I prayed for her, and 5 years later she tells me, now I am a mother. So this pastor in one of those churches, stands up with a microphone and shares this story. And that's a pattern that I have been able to see here in my country and other countries in Latin America. Is that I think number one, for ignorance, um, they don't know when life begins. And number two, I think that the church has diminished the confidence and the trust in the Bible. So certain things are assumed. I remember another pastor that we were teaching the question number one about value of human life and the beginning of life. And he says, okay, so Anderson, just to confirm, life begins 24 hours after the sperm meets the egg. Is that correct? So, because that's the typical teaching, like when there's fertilization or conception, then 24 hours later is that it is human. So, part of my job now, full
Which is
time in Passion Life,
scientifically inaccurate, is what you're saying. This is
that is
scientifically
correct. That
inaccurate.
is
And okay, so
mhm,
you're correct. Part of what you're doing is you're correcting the science understanding. Okay, I got you.
exactly, exactly. And in order to get to the science, we start with the Bible. We have
Mm.
the four questions design, which is
All right,
biblical
stop
and
right
very
there.
simple.
Stop right there. We don't want to assume that anybody watching knows what the four questions are. So,
Yeah,
this again, for our audience sake, we want to try to consolidate biblical Christian ethics around abortion down to four simple questions. So, Anderson, tell us what the four questions are, then go back to your story.
yeah. Question one is, what does God say about the value of human life, including life in the womb? Number two, what God tells us about the shedding of innocent blood, including abortion. Number three, how do we take the gospel to those that experience guilt and shame from abortion so they are free and forgiven? And number four, what God calls us to do to stop the shedding of innocent blood and how others have done in the past. So, those are the four questions. Going back to my story connected to question one, we want to correct people's science, but we do it after we establish the foundation of what God says. And so we work with Genesis and the Gospel of Luke. And when necessary, we have a bunch of other Bible verses that helps us teach pastors in the language of a pastor the biblical formula of conception and give birth. So I think that the Bible, being so ancient and written by different authors in different cultures and different areas, is firm in informing us that life begins at conception. In other words, God sees the human that is being created in conception as a whole human being during development. So we start with helping people see that the Bible treats the unborn as a human being, as an image bearer. And so after that, we go through science. We confirm that life starts just with the union of the male sperm and the female egg, and not 24 hours later. Just at that very moment, there is a new image bearer, a new human being that didn't exist before. And so one of the things that I try to correct as well are expressions such as it doesn't have a human form. Well, the question is that the human form develops through our entire life. Okay. So, first, we help pastors see it from the Bible because they fear. I have pastors telling me, we don't talk about abortion because that's political. And some politicians tell me, well, that's too religious. And so, when we go to pastors and we teach with the Bible, with the language of a pastor, and for example, pastor, you don't need to go full blown with the word abortion. Just use the shedding of innocent blood. That's a biblical expression. And so, that helps us break the ice and bring awareness and and see it as not only as something logical or scientific, but also something that has to do with discipleship in the church.
Sure. So this pastor started to have his eyes open as to how much the Bible does inform us on how to lead and
Mhm.
respond, but also gave you an
Yeah,
opportunity to use science to correct falsehood that he was believing that that play into the idea that chemical abortion, for example, or other places would be appropriate because it's not
right,
human yet. Okay, I got
right, right.
you. Okay,
And
well,
just to finish that idea,
yeah,
I something there is a common denominator when we teach Luke chapter 1, when Mary meets Elizabeth. You
uh-huh.
know, I asked Pastor, hey, how old was John the Baptist? And they said, well, yes, he was 6 months. How
Mm.
old was Jesus? And they don't have any idea. And that happened to all of us. We never asked that question to the Bible. What was the size of Jesus when Mary meets Elizabeth? And that's enlightening because you see Jesus Christ as very God and very man just right there. And he doesn't
That's
have
right.
hands, he doesn't have a head. He's developing, just maybe a week old.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Someone said to me once, well, it doesn't look like a baby. And I said, well, actually, it looks like every other baby at that age of development. That it's completely normal. It's just that we're
Yeah.
just not used to seeing babies that are 1 day old in the womb as
Mhm.
opposed to 1 day old after birth. But that's part of the education process for sure. So,
Yeah.
uh, tell us, just like this year, where have you gone to teach pastors and leaders these four
Yeah.
questions? I
Yeah.
think it'd be interesting
Um,
for our audience to just kind of know where you're going.
yeah, I'm happy to share about that. First of all, I am working with a committee, a pro-life committee here in my city, in Medellin. That committee started back in 22, and we go to other churches and we go to elementary and high schools as well, public and Christian. So here in Medellin, we have teaching. We have already pastors I work with that they teach the four questions without me and with me. And we have people going to schools to do apologetics. And also, we work with pregnancy centers, helping them counseling. And back in April, we did a tour throughout Colombia with a doctor teaching people how to use the ultrasound and what to identify when they are doing the ultrasound in order to do a rescue. So we start from our own city and going further and further. And so this year, I have been working in Mexico. Back in February, I went to Mexico by the third time to Mexico City and another city called Aguas Calientes. And, and so we were there teaching the four questions. After that, we tried to follow up and help people, with tips and ideas so they can reteach the four questions by their own to their own churches. I've been to Chile. I just came from Chile a couple weeks ago, and we work with a couple of pastors. We train a different group of about 60 pastors, and I actually came with Jeannie Pernia, help them with some advice and guidance on how to establish the pregnancy center. Also came to Honduras, Guatemala.
Nice.
I was with you in Guatemala. It was amazing,
Okay.
800 pastors.
Yeah.
We came to El
And
Salvador. Yeah, El
Cuba?
Salvador,
Cuba? El
Cuba,
Salvador?
yes.
Okay.
Cuba, El
And
Salvador.
is that, well, you do a lot of traveling. Listen, we're going to take a break.
Yeah,
When we get back, I want to go a little further, talk a little bit about your work with high school students and helping young people talk about pro-life without using the Bible, defending the case for life without the Bible in Latin
sounds good.
America. We'll take a break.
The US accounts for only 3% of the abortions that happen in our world each year, leaving 97% of the crisis before us as a world missions challenge. Would you join us in serving where the need is greatest? PassionLife, rescuing the most vulnerable where abortion is most concentrated.
We've received a really overwhelming and wonderful response to this tiny baby fetal model that we've developed here in PassionLife. This fetal model is a medically accurate representation from the 9th week after conception. If you go to our website, we've got a way for you to not only send those tiny babies around the world, but find out a way that you can have some of those tiny babies come to you for your own use as well.
I'm with Anderson Ocampo, who lives in Medellin, Colombia, and works with PassionLife as a Bible teacher and apologetics teacher to pastors and leaders throughout all of Latin America. And we're just talking about some of his experiences in bringing the gospel of life to God's people there, uh, teaching apologetics. I wanted to zero in on the apologetics here. By the way, we've also mentioned these 4 questions and how they're being used to transform and guide churches all over the world, including in Medellin and other countries outside of Colombia. If you want to see these 4 questions for yourself, it's a 10-page document. It's free as a download, and you can find them at passionlife.org. Just go to the homepage, you'll see the word resources there. You click on that and you'll see the 4 questions. And you'll also see a leader's guide to the 4 questions. And these are designed so that anyone can teach what the Bible has to say about our response to the shedding of innocent blood. Anderson, as you've gone into schools, you just can't quote the Bible, and everybody recognizes that we want to know what the Bible says, but we also want to know how to make the case for life in secular or even hostile environments. So you go into high schools with kind of a pro-life message too. Can you tell us briefly about some of your experiences there?
Absolutely. And let me share with you a picture where I am answering questions from students. We go to both Christian and non-Christian schools, and the questions are pretty much the same. And so we allow the students to ask and comment freely without any judgment. We want just to create an environment of confidence where they can bring up their questions. Most questions I find I receive are like, what's going to happen if the baby is going to suffer? What if the mother is very poor? Those are the main questions here in Latin America. Of course, those like my body, my choice, on it's not a human yet. Those are questions that we try to bring up in both scenarios. So we try to use logic, and I try to stay with what Scott Klusendorf uses is just what's the unborn. The abortion is evil or is the killing of a human being only if the unborn is human. So I try also to ask students, what do you mean by a clump of cells? Or do you know cases where the mother is in imminent danger? Or how do you explain that it is not human? And then, of course, we use the tiny babies to show them how a baby is at 9 weeks, and that just changes their mind. They've never seen most of the times a baby that size. So we use the logic and we use the fetal model and we ask them questions as well.
It's a beautiful thing to see young people engaging on this issue and not being afraid to talk about it or getting angry and violent about it. Time frame here, we're kind of grieving the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk, and he was famous for going on to campuses
Mm,
and saying, "Prove me wrong," engaging people on hard questions.
right.
And that's kind of what we're doing in the world of pro-life, in the pro-life arena. We
Hmm.
don't get into politics so much, but we do want to get into the pro-life space and engage young people to think. And those are going to be some of the most exhilarating moments, aren't they? To see young people, the lights go on, the wheels start turning. And again, I just want to encourage you, if you want to learn how to make the case for life in 5 minutes or less, uh, drop by our website, passionlife.org, and look for the resource called Only One Question, which
Hmm.
is this is an entryway to learn how to make the case. Hey, you wrote a book also
Hmm.
called Apologetica Pro Vida. And tell us why you wrote this book and what kind of response you're seeing.
Yeah, it's been 2 years since I published that book. And the reason I wanted to write that book was because most of the pro-life written books or literature around in Christian bookstores and even Catholics are translated from English. And so sometimes lots of that information, the reader may believe it applies only for the US or the English speaking countries. And some of the arguments I thought needed to be contextualized to our language, our culture.
Beautiful.
And also, another reason was that most of the literature around on how to defend life is focused on logic and science, but not with Bible support verses. So I wanted to
Mm.
provide both, to provide both the Bible and logic, statistics, and in how to do it. So I really wanted
Okay.
to help pastors and young people to think the assumptions about the issue, but also not just talking about talking wrongly or just exposing abortion, but also showing the alternatives of life. So showing why
Well,
life,
Anderson, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but where our time is almost out
Okay,
here, I just want to commend
okay.
you for the book using both the Bible and moral reasoning and scripture. I want to commend you for your work, and I want to pray that the gospel of life will go out and multiply 1,000-fold. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.